All right, all right. Got all three of us back together again today. What is up? It's the Freedom from Alcohol podcast. And my name is Chris Shatek, along with Lauren Howman, Matt Gardiner. What's up, guys?
Hello, hello.
Hey, hey.
So today, just going to warn you, put maybe a little disclaimer. You might not like this one. It might be a little bit like, oh, is that me that they're talking about? But that's okay. And what I'm getting at here is we're talking about the victim mentality. And you probably know somebody in your life that has a little bit of that going on. Maybe it's you that has a little bit of that going on. And again, that's all right, because we're going to talk about it. We're going to figure out what's going on and why it's very, very unhelpful. Because I would say it's one of the most difficult things for me to help people with when somebody has a victim mentality, because I've found a lot of the times they aren't willing to admit that they have a victim mentality, and they actually enjoy being in that victim place because it allows them then to justify when something goes wrong. They can say, see, I told you, this sucks. This sucks. Everything is against me. And they get to stay there in victim mentality. And it's very hard to get people out of that. And so, maybe you've tried in your life with somebody who's a victim and you're like, just nothing seems to work. And it's very frustrating. And I've lived in this spot a few times in my life, the victim mentality. And looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, I was totally like blaming everybody but myself. And that is why I wasn't getting results in my life. It really is amazing when we flip the script and put all the responsibility and take all the accountability on ourselves, whether it was our fault or not. Something shifts and something changes with that. And I'll let you guys kind of speak to this. And then, I'll give my 2 cents on it too. But what do you guys have to say about this whole victim mentality?
Who do you want to hear from first? I'll go.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lauren.
I'm always so scared I'm going to cut somebody off and then nobody can hear anything because we're both talking at the same time. That's the one nuance of Zoom that you have to like really work on. Anyway, yeah. So victim mentality, it's a big problem because we know that alcohol is treated differently than other substances. So when we look at heroin, we don't see, oh my gosh, this poor heroin user, she's so broken. We look at it and we say, heroin's the problem. Awesome. Now let's get this girl some help. But with alcohol, society twists it and says it's us that's the problem and not the alcohol. But then we start to believe that we're a victim too. And so, yes, when I started drinking, I had no idea that I was going to become a problem drinker. But once it happened, I couldn't just sit there and point at the alcohol industry or the television and social media to say like, well, they lied to me. And so it's not my fault. And I get to continue this behavior because it's not my fault. And you know what? We were lied to. Everybody that ends up in this boat, we were lied to. We didn't know this was going to happen. We wouldn't have knowingly done this to where we ended up having a problem and maybe lost friends, relationships, and all these other things. But now that we know that we have a problem, it is our responsibility to do something about it. It doesn't matter that, big alcohol lied to us and that it's way more addictive than what we thought, or that it kills so many more people than what we knew about, that everything's been hush hush. Yeah, that's not our fault. But now that we're sitting here and we're raising our hand and we're saying, oh gosh, things are really not going well because of alcohol, then it's on us to make a decision to get out from underneath of it. And I think that's a lot of people just stop at that one space where they're like, I do have a problem, but it's not my fault. And I don't know how to get out of it. And I should just be able to point my finger elsewhere.
Yeah. And the problem with that is like, that's not going to get you any results. It's not going to get you where you want to go. Right. You're looking at something outside of yourself to take care of this. And that never will happen. Because like you said, a lot of those things are true. Right. And maybe you did, like in my case, I became a big drinker because of the people that I chose to hang out with. And they were all big drinkers. And so that's the road I went down. But it was ultimately my choice to continue hanging out with those people and making those decisions. And so it's like, if I were to continue to say, well, it's not my fault, it's because of this and that, and I need to drink because whatever the because is, right? Like, it's like, what are we looking for? Sympathy? That's never going to get us where we want to go. And so, yeah, holding on and clinging on to those things is just going to keep us stuck. And so, yeah, it's a great point you bring up there. Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this, you know, when you're talking about like accepting responsibility, that doesn't necessarily mean it's you're forgiving or like forgetting what's happened to you, right? We're not saying that like you haven't been victimized here, right? It, you know, something has happened to you. It's like an acute experience that you had. The victim mentality is when that experience then echoes through the rest of everything that you're doing, and then, you know, becomes an excuse for and or a reason for what your, you know, your behaviors are, right? So it's not negating what's happened to you. But the, you know, the best thing to do, and we both of you touched on it, is like having that accountability for yourself. To me, that's the opposite of the victim mentality, is like realizing that, yes, there's things that have happened to you in your life that are not your fault, but they are your responsibility. So like, that doesn't, you know, suggest that you caused it, but your ability to respond to, you know, what has happened, you know, since then in your life, that is completely in your control and your responsibility. And to your point, Chris, it's like, it feels very empowering to take that back. And I think there is a comfort, you know what I mean, to be able to like blame somebody or something. And it kind of keeps you in this story of like, oh, you know, this isn't my fault. It's almost like arguing for your limitations at that stage.
Yeah.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
And it's easier that way, right? Because then you don't
It
have to
is.
do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, the pointing the finger thing. So the final, you know, thought on this as well is like the victim and like blame to me is various, like the pointing of the finger at like a circumstance or somebody else, right? The best way to remedy that is to be able to just forgive. And that sometimes it's self-forgiveness. A lot of times it's self-forgiveness. And then there's also the whole idea of like forgiving somebody. You don't necessarily have to do it verbally to them. If you're not comfortable being in a room with them or whatever it may be, there's still the opportunity to forgive them inside of you, right? And let them essentially off the hook for something. And it's kind of like that whole, there's that phrase of like drinking poison in hopes that you're harming the other person. That's what a lot of this, what we're talking about today is doing, right? You're getting angry or blaming somebody, and it doesn't affect them whatsoever, but it's really affecting you, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people like could change their lives if they understood that, but they just want to keep clinging on to this story that they're a victim. And you can very well be a victim. Like bad shit can happen to you that is outside of your control, and that's fine. But at that point, you get to choose, like, am I gonna stay there, or am I gonna go, all right, well, I'm gonna let that go and continue moving forward, right? And if you aren't willing to let that go, and you aren't willing to take responsibility and accountability, it's going to be very hard, especially going on an alcohol-free journey, to get the results that you want. Because I've seen it before where, you know, I'll have coaching calls with people and they're like, well, this happened and that happened, and I drink because of this. And, you know, it's just like, you're never going to get the results that you want because you're looking outside of it. And I mentioned that earlier, but it's like, hey, we all have reasons that we could drink. You know, I had insecurities. I didn't like my job. My boss was a dick. Like, you know, all these things that I used to cling on to. And it's like, so what? So what? You know, like life is going to give you things that you don't like. You can either stay the victim and go, woe is me, feel sorry for yourself, or you can say, you know what, like Matt was saying, empower yourself. Get excited about the fact that, you know what, you're in charge of your own destiny. And so it really does change things when you look in the mirror and say, I am 100% responsible and accountable for everything in my life. All the choices I've made to this point have gotten me here. And get excited and say, because I'm the only person that's going to be able to do something about that and move forward if I take that accountability. So that's where I think this journey needs to begin when you want to quit drinking.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. And, you know, we have a lot of conversations going on, the three of us, with just different people in our communities and, you know, people that are new followers, right? Always like to welcome people. And, you know, you can usually tell where somebody is in their journey. And again, there's no judgment. Like I was the same way at a certain point. Like I think we all have that hump to get over at some point, right? And realize, you know, what we have to let go of in order to be able to progress. So I say that to say, like, I can usually tell where somebody is in their journey if I ask them just a simple question of like, you know, what's your relationship with alcohol? And then it ends with, or their reply ends with like what you're talking about, Chris. There's like 5 or 6 things that have happened to them.
Yeah.
And
Or my husband,
right.
or my wife, or,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then oftentimes you start dissecting that a little bit, and it's like, something that happened 3 years ago, something that's like, and again, it's just like, not to cast judgment, but it's just, you can usually tell when there's somebody that's like, doesn't bring that type of stuff up and is very much like, okay, this is what I'm doing, solution focused. I'm like, okay, bingo, this person's ready for that next step, right? So I just want to bring that up just in case it's like, when you're telling your story or presenting your story to somebody else, as far as why you are where you are, what approach are you taking? What choice are you making?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. And even how you talk about your own story from our perspective, being where we are with our sobriety and being alcohol free, how do you tell your story? Because I do tell mine in a way where it's like, I started out as that normal drinker, and then I started drinking a little bit more, and I started bringing in a little bit more, but it's not about, my husband did this and that made me depressed and I wanted to drink, or
Good point. Yeah.
we had infertility issues. So, I had infertility issues. Well, that's not fair. So I should be able to drink. So I don't tell my story in a victim mentality way. So that's self-awareness that I wasn't even aware that, and I've listened to your stories many times, and neither one of you have any victim mentality either. It's like, I don't want to tell your story, Chris, but it's like, hey, I was in the music industry. That's what we did. We drank. But you're not saying like my job made me an alcoholic, right? Like just taking that personal accountability.
Yeah, really
absolutely.
Good point.
Yeah. And it just changes the way that you live your life when you look at it this way, right? When it's like, okay, no matter what happens, I'm taking ownership. You just live differently, not only with the alcohol thing, but in all areas of your life, and that's what I love about coaching, right? And what we do with people, because, hey, we may tell you something that you don't want to hear, but it's going to be good for you, right? Like, we're never going to be an asshole about it. We're never going to like, hey, you're bad or this, you shouldn't do that. But it's like seeing things that maybe you didn't even realize. Like, I didn't know that I was living in a victim mentality until I started working with coaches, and they say, is that really your fault or is it somebody else's? And, just shining a light on some of these things, which is where coaching can come in handy. Like, we're going to help you see things that you maybe aren't seeing yourself, So,
Sure.
yeah. So if you are in this spot, like, really, I would encourage you to, if you're listening to this and you're going, huh, am I playing a victim a lot? Like, just ask yourself and sit with that for a minute and see, like, are you putting the blame on others and circumstances, or are you taking full ownership of everything in your life? Like, you can't do it half-ass either. You can't say, okay, I'm going to take ownership for some of these things, but I'm not ready to do it on these things. That's not going to be a good solution. You got to just cut it all and say, this is it. It's me. It's my life. I'm the director of my life, and it changes today, right? Because that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what Lauren was mentioning, I love that. It's like when we look back on ours, it's the things that we could have continually used as victim mentality stuff is actually what we leveraged into like some of our greatest moments of our lives, right? It's like that comeback story that everybody like, man, that's so inspiring to hear. So think of that. Like, think of the things that you're using right now as like you're feeling underneath it. And it's like, I can't get it from underneath this. That's the kind of thing that when you have that breakthrough, you're going to look back at, and that'll be that kind of story that'll inspire somebody else to get out of their victim mentality too. So thanks, Lauren, for bringing that up. It's a really good point.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hell yeah. I love it. See, it's empowering to go, I'm changing my story. I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a victor. And start today and create the life. And I think a lot of us get caught up in like thinking we don't have choices, or we're stuck, we have to settle. It's like, no, man, you don't have to do that. You can build whatever life you want, but you have to be willing to start with taking accountability and ownership for your shit. So I hope you have found this episode helpful. Again, we work with people that are high functioning drinkers, that are driven, that are motivated, really have a pretty damn good life. It's just that alcohol is still clinging to them. And maybe you're not ready. Maybe you go, I'm a little bit scared to give it up because I don't know what the hell a life without alcohol would be like. Hey, we all can agree that we are right there with you. That's where we were, right? Like, I don't know what that looks like. We can help you. We can show you how to live a life where alcohol doesn't have the power over you anymore. And it's not that you can't drink, it's that you don't want to drink. It makes such a difference. So that's what we help people with, whether you want to work with us in our Freedom from Alcohol coaching program, or just join our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/I want freedom from alcohol. A lot of great community and support in there. And you know, just get into our orbit. We appreciate you listening to this. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another episode. So we'll see you guys then.
All right.
Thanks,
See you
everybody.
next Thursday. Bye, guys.